amen. Judges chapter 14, we pick up again with the story of Samson. I think I've said that he was the last of the judges, but I believe Samuel also qualifies as a judge. He's the last judge in the book of Judges, but Samuel, who will come later, is also mentioned to have been judging Israel. But nonetheless, Samson, a very unique story, tragic in some ways. He has all of this blessing that he's born with, these parents who are visited by the angel of God. His birth, much like Jesus's, is announced, and it's given great detail here in the book of Judges. He's told to have this and take this Nazirite vow, complete consecration to God. His hair would grow. He would leave alone wine or anything to do with grapes, really, and he would stay away from anything that was dead, any dead bodies. So those were the three kind of main parts of the Nazirite vow. Even his mom would take this vow while she was pregnant, and so that was all outlined for us, and that'll come into play in chapter 14. So all of this grace in his life, he's born with tremendous grace of God, the grace to be born into a godly family, and the grace to have been given this start, even as we read the last verses of chapter 13, that the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him. So even that, the grace of God, that the Spirit of God is moving in his life. And that's our segue into chapter 14 as we make our way and watch just how Samson's life unfolds, this life of, instead of living passionately for the things of God, he lives passionately for the things of himself, his own desires. And we watch what this creates and the tragedy it brings into his life until finally at the end, there is some redemption, and we watch this change. This maturity comes in Samson through really some very difficult circumstances that have been created by his own pursuit of pleasure. So, and yet in all this, God is using this man. You know, he's using him. Well, let's start into it in chapter 14. Now, Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So Timnah is the Israeli version, I guess, of Tijuana. It's a border city. If you live in California, you go over the border to Mexico, you've got Tijuana. Well, if you're part of the tribe of Dan and you cross over into Philistine territory, one of the border cities is Timnah. So Samson, we don't know how old he is. He seems to be traveling alone. We don't know. He spends a lot of time alone. That's one of the characteristics of Samson. He's somewhat of a loner. He does a lot of the things that he does alone. He ends up hiding in a cave by himself. He ends up, all the battles that he fights are pretty much alone. Not like a Gideon who fought with an army or a Jephthah who led a whole army. Samson's operating alone. So we know that he goes down to Timnah, to this Philistine territory, this Philistine city. It seems that at this point in Israel's history, we've come a long way from Othniel, our first judge, and there's where people were crying out for God to save them. Now we'll find Israel is somewhat comfortable with their relationship in and among the Philistines. So off to Timnah he goes, and he's there. He goes to the bar. I don't know where he goes. We don't know how old he is, but he's at some kind of place where he sees this Philistine girl. Oh, man. How many of you know trouble is coming? We remember what happens when David saw Bathsheba. That's where it starts. You know, the lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, the pride of life. So he sees her. What happens next? We might say if we were texting with Samson, Samson is in Timnah, and he texts us. He says, "Hey, Steve, you got to see this girl. She is a hottie. You know, she's beautiful. She's from the Philistines, but she is good looking. What do you think I should do? Should I talk to her?" If he texts me, you know, now in my 21st century mind, I'm saying, Samson, you know you're not supposed to be with Philistine. You're a Jew. You're an Israelite. You know they're off limits. Don't mess around with that. Flee sexual immorality. Flee from that. You know she's not going to be good for you. Was that what you would say? Well, let's see. Not sure why that's funny, but okay, whatever. You know, you read ahead. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, "I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now, therefore, get her for me as a wife." What are you, 6? Samson, I mean, we don't know how old he is. He's obviously of marrying age, so quite some time has passed between chapters 13 and 14. He's grown up. He's at least 18, 19, 20 years old, somewhere in there. So at marrying age, they are strictly forbidden to marry in between religions. So at this time, mixed marriage doesn't involve skin color. Mixed marriage involves spiritual pursuits. And we still wrestle with this kind of thing today. A young man or a young girl, they meet someone at school, they meet someone at a party, and they're not a believer. You grew up in church, and, well, you're going to be the one that, I don't care about the future. I don't care about anything else. I just want to be with them. I'm in love. I love them. And I just need to be with them. But what about, I mean, because if you're going to date, the potential is that you could continue dating. And if you continue dating, the potential is that you could get engaged. And if you get engaged, then likely the next thing is going to be to get married. And if you have a different prime passion in your life, I've had this discussion with many young couples. If you have a different prime passion in your life, it's going to make decision-making really, really hard. It's going to create a lot of difficulties. And there are many people in this congregation that would tell me and would urge me when a young couple comes to you and he's an unbeliever and she's a believer, that's usually the way it works out. And he's more than willing to become a temporary believer until the marriage is happened, and then all of a sudden the true colors are revealed. I mean, love and lust make people do crazy things like lie about their spiritual beliefs. So, hey, I'm willing to play the game until we're married, and then the true colors come out. Ladies, what you want to see is who he really is before you marry him. Because that's who he really is. And if, I remember my daughter and I talking about this a long time ago. She had found this saying on the internet that run really hard after God. And if you look next to you and you see someone else keeping up, ask them their name. And I thought, that's great advice, isn't it? Run hard after God, and if there's someone else that's keeping up, then you can ask them their name. That would be good advice for Samson, right? So he sees this Philistine woman, and he just says, I want her. Now, the question is, he's lusting after her, because at this point, you can't really, we use the word love, and we use it in a lot of different ways, right? We have this, in English, we have this one word, love, which is really poor to explain all of the facets of love. There's different types of love. I have a different love for my dog than I do for my wife, right? I mean, just say yes. Please say yes. We understand this, right? Yes, it's a different kind of love. We're going to leave it at that. But there's these different kinds. There's a family kind of love. The Greek word is storge. It means this love between a parent and a child and a parent. I mentioned that on Sunday. There's a sensual kind of love, an intimate kind of love. That's the word eros in Greek. And that also defined, translated love. There's the brotherly love, the kind of love that can be had between a man and a woman, or between two men, or between two women. Think about guys that fight in the military together. They've been on the battlefield together. They love like brothers. That's a philos kind of love, where we get Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And that's a love that has emotions attached to it. Then we have this agape love. That's the godly, unconditional kind of love. And that's the kind of love that can save a marriage when none of the other loves are there. The selfless, unconditional kind of love that doesn't have necessarily the emotional or the intimate. And so by this time, Samson has no time to develop any other kind of love than a lusty kind of love for this woman. He's seen her. And the question is, what do you do with that? Is love, in the way we define it, in the way that Americans use it, is love something that I am passively involved in and it just happens to me? That when it happens to me, then I can't, there's no way to resist it. It just happens to me. I fall in love, oops. And then I fall out of love, oops. But see, don't you get the impression that that's what we've been sold as love? Well, I just have this attraction. How can I say no to it? How can I I have to follow that passion. Is that true or not true? Can you say no to attraction? Absolutely you can. And there are certain times when you should. A married man, a married woman finds herself attracted to someone they work with. Wouldn't you say that that's a real attraction? There can be a real attraction. What do you do when you feel that attraction? It's like a seed that you can either stomp on or water and fertilize. You water it, you fertilize it, the relationship grows. It's an adulterous relationship. It then begins to take root and grow. Now you're in trouble. The best time to squash it is when it's just at that attraction level and you flee. You squash that, you run the other way, you turn away from that, you don't do anything to feed that. You'll be happier for it. Because there's a whole generation that's grown up thinking, well, if I feel it, it must be right. If I feel it, it must be okay. And I'm telling you, the Bible says, I'll read this to you real quickly. This is 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Paul says, this is the will of God, your sanctification, your separateness, that you should abstain from sexual immorality, that each of you should know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in passion of lust, like the Gentiles who do not know God. So there is a way for those of us who know God. There's a self-control. The fruit of the Spirit is self-control, that there's a self-control about us who know God, who are not driven and controlled by passion and desire. We have another boss in our life. We have the Spirit of God that's in our life. So back to Samson, one might say to him, Samson, this is just not going to end well. It's not going to go well. My suggestion to you is that you forget about her and you move on. Now, some might disagree with that. Some might say, well, if he loves her, what could be wrong with that? Well, a whole lot could be wrong with that. Verse 3 says, then his father and mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren or among my people, all my people, that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? That's a little jab there. The Philistines did not practice circumcision, and so this was sort of a jab at Philistines. Hey, Samson, look, anywhere else, from any of the other Israelites, you can have some, any other fruit in the trees in the Garden of Eden, you can have anything else you want, just not that one tree. Why is it that we want the very thing we're not supposed to have? Isn't that true sometimes? The very thing that's off limits, there's this rebellion. It's this desirous and passionate rebellion. The very thing I want, not supposed to have, that's what I want. Samson, anybody else. It's like, who's in control of this relationship between mom and dad and son? Certainly seems like the son's in control. Samson's the one calling the shots in this family. That's not uncommon to our day and age. And Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she pleases me well. He's making demands now of mom and dad. Get her for me. Now, mom and dad, I suppose, could have had some choices in that moment. The interesting thing to me is that the wording really is, in the Hebrew, get her for me, for it is right, or she is right in my eyes. And doesn't that typify what the book of Judges is about? Every man doing what's right in their own eyes. Disregard for God, disregard for morality, disregard for truthfulness. Just, if it feels good, I want it. This following of passions and desires. And this sort of seems typical of the life of Samson. Whatever he wants, that's what he goes for. Whatever desire or passion comes upon him, he feels like that's what he's going to pursue. And again, I think this could read right out of today's books for our own culture. In a way, Samson is very typical. He is, in a way, typifying Israel at the time. He is an embodiment of what the nation of Israel is going through and doing at the time. Get her for me. She pleases me well. But his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So check that out. So on one plane, on the human plane, you've got this tense discussion between a mom and dad and their son who wants to get married. He's chosen poorly. They're trying to rationalize with him. They're trying to reason with him. He won't hear of it because he's in love. And again, that's a familiar story, isn't it? I mean, we're in love, Pastor. Nothing else matters. We're not thinking about the future. We're not thinking about the challenges. You know, it's a lot easier to get married than it is to stay married. And he's not thinking about that. So we have that going on one plane. They're having that discussion. And if you could pan out to outer space, or pan out to heaven, you'd see that God, in his sovereignty, is using this because God was looking for an occasion to come against the Philistines because Israel had not cried out for deliverance. Israel was very comfortable where they are, and it almost seems like if God could have found an obedient person to work through, he would have done it. But instead, he's going to use Samson in his disobedience. He's still going to use that to bring about his purposes against the Philistines. So is God forcing Samson to fall in love with this Philistine woman? No, Samson's doing that all on his own. But God knows Samson, and he's going to use Samson in his passions and desires and his behavior. God is going to use that behavior, and he's going to still use it to accomplish his own purposes. We serve an awesome God. Aren't you glad for that? Because one might think, well, Samson's the judge. He's going to blow God's plan. He's going to make it so God can't accomplish what. No. We give ourselves way too much credit. We worry way too much. So many people fret, well, if I do this, if I do that, in my life, and we're talking about good things. Look, if you're thinking about sin, like the answer is don't do it. But if you do it, God can still use that in your life. Many people have been brought to God because they've made poor choices. God's let them suffer the consequences. They've recognized their poor choices. They've recognized they can't do it themselves. And those very things are what brought them around to God after all. So God has a way. It's beyond me. I'm glad he's God and I'm not. So God is not, we don't hear a lot from God in this, but he's behind the scenes. He's working this all out, and we'll watch how he uses Samson. So Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother and came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now notice vineyards. Remember the Nazirite vow. Now to his surprise, a young lion came roaring against him. That would be surprising. There used to be lions in Israel. There aren't this day, but there's we have many references to lions in the Bible, and historically it's known that lions used to roam those lands. So a lion comes roaring against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily, or literally rushed upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. So we all know how easy it is to tear apart a young goat, right? We do that all the time. Actually, kind of cool, we had 3 little baby goats born while we were in Italy. And so one set of twins, and then the other mom had just a little single baby goat. But those little baby goats, they are pretty fragile when they're born. They're little tiny goats, and I'm not saying I'm going to try tearing them apart with my bare hands. But the point is that he tore apart the lion very easily as tearing apart something that was easily torn apart. Okay, we're all together on that. So he tears apart this lion. The Spirit of God rushes upon him. It's almost like something comes over him. He's possessed by God, right? To be driven by the Spirit, to be possessed by the Spirit of God. We talk about demon possession and what that does. What happens in a person's life when they are filled with the Spirit, when the Spirit of God comes upon them? Think about the mighty rushing wind in Acts chapter 2, when the Spirit of God comes there the day of Pentecost, comes like a mighty rushing wind. And we see the same kind of power. The Spirit of God brings power into a person's life. Now for Samson, it's power to destroy this lion. Wouldn't you have loved to have seen that battle? They used to have a TV show on called Man versus Beast. Have you ever heard of it? I heard about it from a guy. He was doing a sermon that we listened to. It's a Navy SEAL. And he was telling about this Man versus Beast TV show that they used to have. They'd put people in competitions with animals. Like they'd line up a jaguar and a sprinter. They'd say, okay, ready, go, and they'd see who would win. And the animals always won. Except they put this Navy SEAL. He was the top Navy SEAL at doing their obstacle course. So the Navy SEALs run through this obstacle course, and they're timed on it, and they work hard at it. And they put this Navy SEAL up against a chimpanzee. And they started him at this obstacle course, and the Navy SEAL won. And I haven't seen that, but I would love to see that. I would love to see Samson breaking bad on this lion with just the strength and the power involved in that. So he had nothing in his hand, but he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. And then he walked down and talked with the woman, found her again, got her phone number, got her address. They meet up. Here's my mom and dad. That's awkward. She pleased Samson well. After some time, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. So some have estimated maybe a year has passed. So some time has passed, verse 8 tells us, and he had secured this marriage that was coming up and brought his parents down to meet them, and now they return home. And as he's on his way back, he sees this carcass of the lion that he had killed, and there inside has set up this swarm of bees, and honey were in the carcass of the lion. So he reaches in. Now, is Samson supposed to touch dead stuff? Right. He's not supposed to. But again, is this a guy that cares about what he's supposed to do and not supposed to do, right? Now, this was a vow that was sort of imposed on him. He didn't have any choice in that matter. He was born into this life. So he may be resentful of that. He may think, I never took that vow. Doesn't mean anything to me. We don't know. But we know that he plays carefree with this relationship he has with God, with his consecration to God. So he reaches in to the carcass of the lion, dried in the sun and having decayed quickly, and a swarm of bees that's set up in there. There's honey in there. And he takes some in his hand, which is pretty miraculous to me as well, because I'm allergic to bee stings. I get real swollen. Anybody else swell up real bad when you're stung by a bee? Man, and when they're angry, I run the other way. But he takes out some of the honey, and he just begins to eat it right out of the dead lion. And when he came to his father and his mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. So there's some secrecy. Again, he seems to be that he knew what he was doing was wrong, and so he hides it. Isn't that what we do? We know what we're doing is wrong. We hide it. We just leave that out of the conversation. We just don't tell somebody. So again, he's playing fast and loose with these vows in his life. He sees some honey. He wants honey, so he eats honey. No thought of, maybe I shouldn't. I took a vow. Look, we take marriage vows, and we can talk about that. But the bigger one for me is just how lightly we take baptism. That we stand before God and people, and we enter into this thing called baptism, where we make this vow to God that I'm going to follow you all the days of my life. And for so many people, it's just a casual thing. And I think we live in the day of casual vows, don't we? We live in the days, well, I'll make the vow, but later on, if it doesn't suit me, then who cares? Who cares? Jephthah took his vows very seriously, but Samson does not seem to be there, does not seem to do that. So his father went down to the woman, verse 10, and Samson gave a feast there, for young men used to do so. By the way, feast is a drinking banquet or a drinking party. The word feast literally means to drink. So Samson gave a feast there, as young men used to do, and it happened when they saw him that they brought 30 companions to be with him. So he comes down to get married to this Philistine woman. She has to bring people to the wedding. He's alone. He has his parents, but he's alone. He doesn't have any friends with him, nothing like that. He's a loner. He's a lone wolf. So the 30 companions come from the Philistines. In verse 12, Samson said to them, "Let me pose a riddle to you. If you can correctly solve and explain it to me within the 7 days of the feast, then I will give you 30 linen garments," nice clothes, Armani clothes, "and 30 changes of clothing." 30 linen garments, 30 changes of clothing. "But if you cannot explain it to me, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing." So you get this picture of Samson. He's kind of like a playboy. He's kind of, he's the center of attention. He's gambling, right? We're going to make this bet. He's just that's the kind of guy he is. He's just a fleshy kind of guy. And they said to him, "You're on. Pose your riddle that we may hear it." All right, the bet is on. So he said to them, "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet." He's like, sure, he's got this wrapped. They're never going to get that. He's got this wrapped up. He's counting his 30 new sets of clothes already. He's ready to go. But by the way, we learned that Samson is not the stereotype big, dumb ox, right? He's smart. He's a smart kid. He poses this wonderful, intelligent riddle. And Samson is himself, in a way, many have said, a riddle. His whole life is makes us scratch our head. So he gives them the riddle, and they've got 7 days to figure this out. Now, for 3 days, they could not explain the riddle. But it came to pass on the 7th day that they said to Samson's wife, "Entice your husband that he may explain the riddle to us, or else we will burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us in order to take what is ours? Is that not so?" Wow, so what a dilemma Mrs. Samson has. I mean, she's just in the middle of her wedding ceremony. 7 days, they're 3 days in, and now she's already threatened. She's torn. You see, the consequences of even her decision to marry an Israelite, now she's torn between her people and her husband. That's a tough place to be. Sometimes couples get torn between in-laws. Your parents or my parents. It's Christmas. Where do we go? And that's a small one. But sometimes these things, when we don't kind of walk through this properly, it's easy to find ourselves getting torn between two parties, and that can present some real problems. So do you feel the dilemma for her? I mean, it's a death threat on her life. See, that's the kind of people the Philistines were. They said, look, we're not going to get embarrassed by this Israelite. I mean, we're dominant to the Israelites. There's no way this guy is winning the bet. No way. And we can't figure it out, so we need your help. 3 days have gone by, can't figure it out. Now she is stuck in the middle. Verse 16 says, then Samson's wife wept on him and said, "You only hate me. You do not love me." She's got it down, right? Somebody taught this girl. "You only hate me. You do not love me. You have posed a riddle to the sons of my people, but you have not explained it to me." I mean, she is turning on the steam, isn't she? The pressure is on. You don't love me. Oh, man. She's put in a place where now she has to do something that's their marriage is not going to last. We probably already, it's already falling apart at the wedding ceremony. I had one wedding that I was supposed to do. Only time this ever happened, I showed up the morning of the wedding, show up at the groom's house. The big fight had ensued between bride and groom and bride's parents and groom's parents. The wedding got called off that morning. People were showing up at the wedding place. Only they had to send somebody to say the wedding's off. I mean, wow. And this is a couple that, you warn them and you tell them and you go, "I don't think this is a good idea. It doesn't matter. We love each other. We're going to get married." You see, look, if you're the single people in here, all right, single people. Married people, tell them, right? Tell them. Listen, so your love can blind you, lust can blind you. You got to ask people outside of you to say, "What do you think? Am I just," because you lose your mind when you go through this stuff. Like, and then you look back, what was I thinking, right? But then it's too late. It's too late. So she now is put in this place where she's got to manipulate her husband to get what she wants. Ooh. That sets up a tough thing, doesn't it, between a husband and a wife. Now and for her, it was kind of thrust on her by this threat of death. But for a lot of women, it's not the threat of death, it's the threat of not getting your will fulfilled. There's this clash of wills when it comes to marriage. And there can be a difficulty compromising, there can be a difficulty discussing, and this is something that young couples have to sort of sort out for the next 50 years of their lives. And so she's in this place of manipulating him by her words, by saying, "Oh, you hate me, you don't love me, you posed a riddle." And he said to her, "Look, I have not explained it to my father or my mother, so should I explain it to you?" I'm not sure how she received that. That's not the most compassionate guy in the world. Now she had wept on him the 7 days while the feast lasted. What a wedding ceremony they're having, huh? Now she had wept on him 7 days while the feast lasted, and it happened on the seventh day that he told her because she pressed him so much. And the word for pressed literally means oppressed. Now remember, Samson is sort of a picture of Israel, and here we have the Philistine oppression over Israel. Same kind of parallel here. But she has oppressed, distressed, you could write in nagged him. She has just laid on him all week and worn him down. So she finally got what she wanted. But isn't this one of those things where, ladies, you have a lot of control, a lot of power in your husband's life. And it's so easy to want your will so strongly that you then nag. Sometimes for ladies, it's a spiritual thing. You want your husband to come to church. You want him to do what's right. There's a good intention, but you aren't the Holy Spirit. And the best thing you can do is get out of the way and let God deal with him. Because the more you nag him, and this works both ways, but be fair, but this is the way it's presented to us here, so I'm just saying, the more you nag, the worse it gets. The more it brings division in the relationship. And so she's in a very tough spot, and she presses him, she nags. She's going to get her will done, but it's going to cost her. And that's always the case in a marriage. You might get your will accomplished through nagging, but it's going to affect the nature of the relationship that you share. And it's going to set up future communication and power struggle issues. So she explained the riddle to the sons of her people. So the men of the city said to him on the seventh day before the sun went down, "What is sweeter than honey and what is stronger than a lion?" I'm sure Samson, well, he knew. What is sweeter than honey, what is stronger than a lion? They figured out because they were told what the riddle was all about. You could say there's a double meaning here. What is sweeter than honey? Well, love is. And what is stronger than a lion? Well, love is. How did they find out the answer to their riddle? Well, the love of Samson for Delilah, or not for Delilah, that's coming later, for this Philistine woman, or the relationship they had is what they used to then get the answer. And he said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." Now, I'm not sure how she took that. This couple is off to a great start, aren't they? If you have not plowed with my heifer, you would have not solved my riddle. And then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon. That's about a 30-mile trip to the coast. And he killed 30 of their men, took their apparel, and gave the change of clothing to those who had explained the riddle. So his anger was aroused, and he went back up to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. Sounds like an episode of Jerry Springer, doesn't it? I mean, this just goes from bad to worse. So instead of paying for his gambling debt himself, he has to go and murder and kill or murder and steal to get these bloody clothes to then give to these 30 guys. So they won, but he's going to give them the blood money, so to speak. The clothes are going to be filled with blood. And interesting how sin leads to more sin. You start gambling, and then gambling leads to lying, and lying leads to stealing, and stealing leads to, well, you know what comes next. For Samson, it was killing. And so, but remember, God's behind this. So now we have the first kind of attack against the Philistines, and it involves 30 Philistine men that are killed for their clothing in a city 30 miles away, maybe hoping that his reputation wouldn't follow him, or who knows what Samson was thinking. But then his anger is aroused, so he just leaves. He goes back to his father's house, and Samson's wife is given to his companion, who had been his best man. So now the bride now gets married to the best man. Like I said, Jerry Springer. I mean, well, let's just get into chapter 15. All right, chapter 15. After a while, in the time of wheat harvest, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, "Let me go into my wife, into her room." But her father would not permit him to go in. So some say, and some propose, that maybe the marriage arrangement was what would have been called in those days a visiting marriage, or a visit type of marriage. So there was this type of marriage arrangement where the groom would continue to live with his family, and the bride would live with her family, and the groom would visit the bride at regular occasions, bring a gift, and they would then continue with marital intimacy there in her parents' house. And that was part of the way some type of marriages worked at that time. And it could be that that's the case. We don't know. But that would explain why he would bring a young goat down. Again, for us, culturally, doesn't make any sense. But we don't live in that kind of culture. So that could be what's happening. We don't know how much time has passed. Verse 1 tells us it's been a while. We don't know her father. Who knows where Samson had gone? I mean, he kills 30 guys, brings the bloody clothes, and leaves in a huff. Is he coming back? Is he not coming back? I mean, what's the deal? Some say they hadn't even consummated the wedding at this point, or the marriage at this point. So when he comes to knocking, expecting things to all be okay, his father won't let him go into the room. Her father would not permit him to go in. So her father said to her, or to him, verse 2, I really thought that you thoroughly hated her. Therefore, I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead. I can't believe he's offering anything to this guy who's a murderer. And who knows what, conversations had entailed during that whole time. But he comes back and he says, look, I gave her away. I mean, she's not your wife anymore. And so I think Samson's going to take this. Samson's a passionate guy, right? He's not going to go, oh, gee whiz, it's okay. I can understand where you're coming from. This is his wife. And he not interested in the younger sister, evidently. So Samson said to them, this time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them. In other words, he's justifying his anger and retaliation and his vengeance. Again, God behind all of this. Samson went down and caught 300 foxes, and he took torches, turned the fox's tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set the torches on fire, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and burned up both the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. So again, we get this picture of Samson like he's this teenage kind of delinquent mastermind. Now he could have just killed more people or just burnt down the grain, but he decides to play this game where he grabs maybe it's foxes. It could be translated jackals, which jackals tend to travel in packs. Some have said up to 200 in a pack. Because you think, how's Samson, can this really have happened? How's Samson going to catch 300 foxes and then tie them together tail by tail? So you can easily read this and go, I'm not sure about that. But, we don't know how much time it takes Samson to catch 300. And if it was jackals, maybe they travel in larger groups. He puts them in a cage or a fenced-in area, gets 300 of them, ties their tails together, puts the torch in the center of it, and then he opens the gate, and they just go flying into the grain. Now, the valley, the Sork Valley, where this is all happening, is tremendously lush. And even now, if you go there, and we do go there on our Israel trips, there's miles and miles of cornfields. 30 miles of cornfields. This was their livelihood. And so he turns these jackals or foxes loose into the standing grain of the Philistines, and it just burns up all of their crops. Not just the shocks and the standing grain, but the vineyards and the olive groves. Huge forest fire, huge wildfires take place. Remember the olive groves? We talked about this in the book of Joshua, that this area was known for its olive industry. They found in archaeological digs 100 olive presses in this area. This was the lead industrial center for the production of olive oil for the Philistines and for that area. So this was a humongous economic blow to the Philistines. And the Philistines said, who has done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion. So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. So it happened anyway. The very thing she was trying to avoid ended up happening to her in the long run. So this is just welcome to life with the Philistines, and welcome to life when every man does what's right in his own eyes. When you see that there's just no sense of restraint, no sense of justice. There's justice taken into our own hands, and vengeance is the rule of the day. And this is the world that they lived in at this time. Samson said to them, since you would do a thing like this, I will surely take revenge on you, and after that, I will cease. Do you think that's what's going to happen? You think now, so Samson did his, oh boy, it just keeps going back, right? It started out with the whole riddle thing. They couldn't get the riddle, so they got the wife to find out the answer. Samson didn't like that, so he killed the guys, and now, it's just one thing after the next. Everybody kind of taking revenge on everybody else, and the father giving the bride away to the best man, and everybody's getting revenge. And where do you think that's going to lead? We talked about that Sunday, right? Sometimes, we We see this happen in so many ways. Sometimes it's within a family, just even with a couple. He goes and he spends some money that he shouldn't have spent. Well, yeah, I'll show you. And then you go and you spend, I'll get him back, and then I'll spend money I shouldn't spend. And then the whole thing just continues to escalate. I've seen it between in divorced couples when there's a divorce. Between the exes, the ex-spouses, oh, you're going to do that? Well, I'm going to do this. And it's just this revenge, punishment kind of thing. Sometimes there's affairs. There's an adulterous relationship, and one person goes out and is unfaithful. The other person, well, I'm going to show you. Then I'll go be unfaithful. And the damage just gets worse and worse and worse. And we do the very thing to hurt. Sometimes it's just words, right? How many of you have ever punished someone with your words? How many of you have taken revenge with words? So we read about that. The way to overcome evil is not with evil, it's with good. So this is not going to cease after this. Since you would do a thing like this, I will surely take revenge on you, and after that I will cease. So he attacked them, hip and thigh, with a great slaughter. And then he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Etam. This is in the area of Judah. Now the Philistines went up and camped in Judah and deployed themselves against Lehi. That's the name of the city. And the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? So they answered, we have come up to arrest Samson, to do to him as he has done to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom and said to Samson, now stop right there. Don't read. What do you think they should say to Samson? I mean, shouldn't they say, Samson, look, you are a powerful man. We see the Spirit of God has given you great power. And by the way, I don't think Samson was a hulking monster, because they're going to ask, find out where his power comes from. It's not obvious by looking at him that this guy is 6'5", 300-pound linebacker, I mean, he's not that formidable. Otherwise, it'd be obvious where his strength comes from. The guy benches 700 pounds, We know why he's strong. I don't think that's the case. We have no physical description, but we do know they say, well, where does his strength come from? His strength is from the Lord. He's filled with the Spirit. And his hair is sort of representative of that, and we'll get to that later on. But, I don't know that it's obvious. So they should say to him, Samson, lead us. Now is our chance to capitalize against the Philistines and take them down. We can do this. Don't you think they should say that? I mean, Jephthah, we saw the Gileadites came to him and look, we need your help. We need your help to conquer this battle against the Ammonites, So that could, but this is what's so jarring is what they do say. They went down to the cave of the rock of Edom, and they said to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is this you have done to us? Now, doesn't that strike you? Do you see how comfortable they've gotten in their place of oppression? They're saying, Samson, look, don't rock the boat, man. Don't cause trouble. We're living, it's peaceful. I know we're oppressed. I know we're addicted. I know we've got issues, but at least it's peaceful like that. I understand my addiction. I understand my issues. I'm comfortable there. It's my mess. Let me lie in it. It's their mess. Let us lie. Don't mess with it. Which just shows how far Israel had come in their own culture. The culture has been stronger for them than God has. So he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. But they said to him, we have come down to arrest you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves. So they spoke to him, saying, no, but we will tie you securely and deliver you into their hand, but we will surely not kill you. So he sort of surrenders himself. They bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. So now they're turning him over, their judge. They're turning him over to the Philistines. Surely they're going to kill him. But when he came to Lehi, and maybe he expected that he'd be able to break out, when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting against him, and then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. He's overcome with this tremendous strength. The ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire, like rope that's kind of been singed with fire. It's just falls apart like ash. And his bonds broke loose from his hands, he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey. If you're going to do jawbones, it's got to be fresh. You don't want stale or you want last week's. Got to check. If you're going to use a donkey's jawbone, you got to check the expiration date. Some say that over the city walls where they would cast the bodies of dead animals. So you've got, carcasses around the outskirts of the city. So he finds this freshly dead, again, not supposed to be touching dead stuff. He was at a drinking party, not supposed to be drinking, continues to not pay attention to his vows, not take them seriously. He finds this fresh jawbone of a donkey. He reaches out his hand and he takes it and he kills 1,000 men with it. And then Samson proposes another sort of poem or song. He says, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. And there's a play on words here that you can't get unless you read Hebrew. The word for pile or heap is very similar to the word for donkey. So some have translated this, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have made donkeys of you. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. Again, now he killed 30. He's destroyed their crops. Now he kills 1,000 of the Philistines. But again, he's operating how? As a lone ranger. And there is, in the story of Samson, we read it, we go, this is so unorthodox. I mean, that God is using this guy to accomplish his will. He's completely disregarding his consecration to God, and yet God is using him. It's crazy. But again, I think in this time, there was such a lack of obedience to God. There was such a distance from God that God is now using this disobedient man, and he's going to use him to accomplish his will. But think about it, in a way, Samson is for us a type of Christ. When Christ conquers the enemy, death, he does it how? He does it alone. So there are types and shadows of Christ in the story of Samson. Remember, Samson makes it into the hall of faith, right? Which just demonstrates the amazing grace of God. And we'll watch what happens with his last days. He, in his death, will bring about the victory for his nation. There's very much of Christ in the story of Samson. But we won't get there to the end. His hands are outstretched. Oh, it's good. It's good when we get there. You'll see. And so it was when he had finished speaking that he threw the jawbone from his hand and called that place Ramath Lehi, or literally Jawbone Hill. Isn't that great? How many of you saw the movie Hacksaw Ridge? It reads the same. This is Jawbone Hill. And there is the victor. There is Samson. He's been, the Spirit of God has rushed upon him. He's gotten this great victory. Killing 1,000 men by yourself, that's exhausting. So you can imagine him covered with blood, got the jawbone in his hand. It's almost like he's been in an altered state, I imagine. Almost like he's just been in a frenzy almost. And now he calls this place is now named for that event. And look at verse 18. Then he became very thirsty. No doubt. And it just reminds us of the humanness that, yes, he's filled with the Spirit, but yes, he's still human. Just like Jesus on the cross. Remember what he uttered on the cross? I thirst. I thirst. And so he cried out to the Lord. First time we read that. Nobody else has cried out to the Lord. But now, after this victory, he cries out to God. He cries out to, capital L-O-R-D, cries out to Yahweh, and he said, you have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. Wow, that's pretty perceptive, isn't it? So he's giving God the credit. So there's something he knows. He knows that this strength that he has is not from himself. This has got to be from somewhere else. I know this is not of me. You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised. So this is what he prays. He says, look, God, you gave me this great victory. You're going to leave me here to die? And God answers his prayer. So God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out, and he drank. And his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore he called its name An-Hakor, which is in Lehi to this day. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So that this name An-Hakor means the caller spring, or the spring of the caller, the one who called out to God, the one who calls out because they're thirsty. God, there's no rebuke to Samson, just an answered prayer. When you cry out to God and you're thirsty, I'm not talking about physical thirst. We read about that, right? The one who drinks of this water, you'll never thirst again. I love that. That's one of my favorite passages. If you think about that, we live in a world that is thirsty for something that will satisfy. You ever had that? You ever go to the refrigerator and you're looking for something, you don't know what it is, but you open the fridge and you're like, and you close it. So you go to the pantry and you're like, it's, what time is it? Walmart's open 24 hours. I could get there, but I don't feel like driving. Like there's something that I want, and I just don't know what it is, and I just craving it. And so you look in the fridge, and it's just nothing satisfies, right? You try a bowl of cereal, but that doesn't do it. Well, cereal always does it, doesn't it? Cereal's always good. But that's what people are like spiritually. I mean, have you found that to be true? Like you look around the world and people are just trying to find something that will satisfy. And when you find Jesus, when Jesus fills your life, you need nothing else. Addictions go away. Cravings go, they're dealt with. They're dealt with because Jesus makes you whole. He satisfies your soul. He satisfies the longings. He fills your heart. And you find that all the other needs you had, they're just not as important. You just don't need them. You don't thirst anymore. Has that been true of you? I don't know about, I can say of me. Yeah, absolutely. Amen? Amen. All right. We got the gripping conclusion next week. Let's pray. Lord, as we take this story of Samson and try to digest, Lord, your ability to take unorthodox people like Samson with unorthodox personalities and use them for your purposes. Lord, amazing. It's the story of the church. So, Lord, teach us from this passage. I pray we can take away some application for our own lives. I pray that nobody in here would be driven by passion, driven by desire, that we would be led by the Spirit. It's in Jesus' name we pray. All God's people said, amen.